This is the second part, the detailed part of how to build arcade buttons for using RF transmitters to connect to and control FPP and control your xLight sequences. Before this, you should have watched the overview video to explain how the whole thing worked, and then you should really have watched part one of how to put transmotor onto a Sonoff RF bridge. Now, in that video, I did explain that one of the slight negatives, if you like, is that it only works with certain transmitters. Now, actually, luckily that's 80% of the transmitters. So I'm going to explain before we start the build what you need to look for. So, in the previous video, we put a transmotor onto a Sonoff bridge, and that makes it able to talk MQT to Falcon Pi player or home automation. But to simplify things, I didn't update the RF chip on the actual Sonoff, because that involves cutting wires and soldering and all kinds of rubbish, and it only really is needed for probably 5 or 10% of the transmitters out there. So because you're starting from scratch, what I would suggest is that when you buy a transmitter, whether it be a PIR or a button or a remote control, just look for that EV code, encoder code. So you buy the right type of transmitter, and the code is EV1527. If you search in Amazon or eBay or anywhere else, you'll find 80%, if not more, of the devices, the transmitters, PIRs, etc., fulfill that code. And I've tried lots of different ones. There are a ton out there, and they're usually very cheap. Apparently, it also works with some other protocols, some other coded protocols, but I've not personally tested those. But if you stick with that particular encoding transmitters, then, you know, I've certainly bought loads and loads of different ones, and they've all worked perfectly. So there are lots of them. You know, there are handheld remotes, PIRs, and the one I like, which I'm going to talk about in this particular video, is that little 4-channel transmitter that you can connect to physical buttons, and I'll show that in great detail in a minute. And again, if you look, that says it works with EV1527. This is basically where you can have a wireless transmitter, very cheap and very reliable. This is the box I use, but you could use any IP66 box. I use this one because it's just available locally. The buttons I use, again, you can pick loads of different buttons. They're just microswitch buttons with an LED light in them, so that you can actually get a positive feedback when they actually press the buttons. But you can use any size or switcher button. Not included in the price, but you can get them fairly cheap. As I say, the main part is the 443 transmitter. It's a 4-channel transmitter. These are what they come like. You can buy them individually for a couple of dollars like this, or you can buy them as part of a kit where you've got a transmitter and receiver and just throw the receiver part away. In this case, I've just used the transmitter part, and they've got pins on them already, so no soldering. But what I do to make it easier is use plugs that you can buy off eBay or Amazon or wherever else that the thing will just plug into. So that's the 4-pin 4-wire plug that I use to go to the 4 buttons. But there's also a 2-wire one that goes for the power supply that goes to a barrel connector. So you can just plug in the battery. In this case, it's just a little 9-volt battery. Will work anything up to 24 volts, from 5 volts to 24 in my experience. But 9 volts is a nice, easy thing. It only uses something like 2.4 microamps in standby, so the battery will last, even if you forget to disconnect it in out of season, it'll last for years. The harness I've actually connected to diodes, and you'll see why in the diagram. I'll explain in a minute. That's just so this is a diagram. As you can see, the transmitter's up there top left. The diodes are just so that I can have a 3-wire button from the actual switches. You could do a 4-wire and do away with the button, but I like to use the 3-wire connectors. So at that point, you could use your 3-wire connector of choice. Loads of them in the xLight world. I just use these because they're inside the box, so it doesn't need to be waterproof. They connect directly to the microswitch in my case. So I've just got 2 microswitches, again with those I think 40mm buttons or something like that. You can use any buttons you like. They all go to microswitches, as you can see there. Microswitches have been around since I think the 60s. Well, I remember seeing them, you know, from dating from the 60s onwards. Used them in all kinds of things. I connect them to plugs just so I can disconnect the harness. The harness is just basically wires with heat shrink to cover the diodes. That last one is just for the aerial, and that's about it. It's a fairly straightforward build, not a lot to it. I say a little bit of soldering where you solder the diodes in, but as I say, if you want to use 4-wire, you don't even have to do that. But it does make a very cheap, because I think that, the transmitters are anywhere between like a couple of dollars to I think $6 if you get them off Amazon. But very cheap. That's for 4 buttons, don't forget. And of course the buttons will cost you whatever system you use. But I like this because it gives you a purely, completely waterproof, because basically I put it in an IP66 box, and I can stick it where I want. The range is, as you'll see in another video, is tremendous. Hundreds of feet. No problem at all. And very reliable. That's the diagram, so you can screenshot it. You will need to see the other videos in this sequence to make sense of the whole thing. But I'm trying to keep it split into short videos so not to bore you to death.